We're recording. Hi, everybody. My name's Amy Dotson. I'm the director of the Northwest Film Center and the inaugural curator of film and new media at the Portland Art Museum. And we're welcoming so many wonderful folks to give the talk today about cinema and care, and what a vital conversation this will be. And I'm so grateful to my friend and colleague, Gina Duncan, who I've been in discussion with for quite some time on a way that we could bring her and her insights and energy and curatorial prowess to Portland. And by the power of Zoom, here we are. So I'm very grateful to Gina for putting all of this together and bringing all of these amazing folks into the same Zoom call. I wish we could all be together. And I look forward to a time where, whether it's Portland or whether it's New York or wherever you all are at this moment, that we can all be together and see one another. So Gina, thank you. And I look forward to hearing the talk as much as anyone else. One last bit of housekeeping. This program is actually supported by our Reimagine Artists Fund, which is an initiative that is helping artists to sustain their creative practices during this time. And so we're very thankful to the folks that have allowed this space to be created and allowed all of these folks to come together to share their insights and wisdom with you all. Thank you so much for being here, and take it away, Gina.
Thank you so much, Amy. So I'm really excited to be here. I have a little housekeeping in that there is a closed caption button at the bottom of your screen. So if you'd like to enable captioning for yourself, you can click that. And I'm Gina. I'm going to give a visual description, and then all our panelists will also give a visual description prior to their first answer. I'm a Black woman wearing glasses. I have on red lipstick, curly hair. There's a white wall behind me. And I have dimples should I smile. So that's me. And I'm coming to you from the traditional territory of the Munsee Lenape. So as Amy mentioned, she reached out to me to do this panel. And the first thing I thought about was the word care. And a big part of that was because I've been thinking a lot about care and how it showed up in my work. At that time, I was operating a cinema. And I know that might sound odd to be a cinema operator and thinking about care, but the idea of hospitality and taking care of folks who come into my space is really important to me, and one that I think that a lot of organizations are starting to just center on now. I also had started 2020 extremely tired, and I had decided to go to retirement, which is actually the name of a small town in Jamaica that my family is from. And what I loved about that experience so much was it reminded me of what it is to be in community, to be able to sit on a veranda and have people walk by and say hello or offer you something, avocado, something from their land, and just take care of you in a way that you don't even have to ask for, that just comes naturally. And for those of you who live in a big city, or even in Portland or wherever you're coming from, you know how uncommon that could be. So it was a very interesting experience for me to have in January going into COVID. I recently heard the poet Natalie Diaz say that sometimes care has to happen on the small scale so it can occur. And I think it's through these hyper-local small acts of care that community is created and sustained. The films in this program are ones that reinforce a commitment to care, at least in my eyes, and a commitment to community. And I'm so grateful that these four incredible artists have joined us today to discuss their filmmaking process and also riff with me as much as they're willing to on how we might create a culture of care right where we live. So joining us today in alphabetical order are Andrew Ahn, Debra Granik, Crystal Kayiza, and Loria Limbal. So Andrew Ahn is a queer Korean-American filmmaker from Los Angeles. His feature Driveways premiered at the 2019 Berlinale and is distributed by FilmRise. The film was nominated for 2 Independent Spirit Awards. His first feature, Spa Night, premiered at Sundance Film Festival and is distributed by Strand. The film won the 2017 John Cassavetes Independent Spirit Award. Debra Granik is a celebrated filmmaker with what she describes as a social realist mentality, is a director and co-writer of Winter's Bone, which premiered at the 2010 Sundance Film Festival and was nominated for 4 Academy Awards. Her first film, Down to the Bone, won the U.S. Dramatic Directing Award at the 2004 Sundance Film Festival, and Granik's 2014 film Stray Dog, a feature documentary, aired on Independent Lens and was nominated for a Film Independent Spirit Award. In 2018, Granik returned to narrative filmmaking with Leave No Trace, which premiered at Sundance and went on to receive wide critical acclaim upon its release. Crystal Kayiza is a director whose work reimagines the aesthetics used to tell stories about Black folks across generations and landscapes. Named one of Filmmaker Magazine's 25 New Faces of Independent Film, her award-winning film Edgecombe was an official selection of the 2019 Sundance Film Festival, and her most recent film, See You Next Time, which aired on Stars, was an official selection of the 2020 Sundance Film Festival. She's currently in pre-production on her first nonfiction feature film, which recently received the 2021 Creative Capital Award. And Loria Limbal is an Afro-Dominican filmmaker and DJ interested in the creation of art that is nuanced and revelatory for communities of color. She is the Senior Vice President of Programs at Firelight Media. Limbal's current film, Through the Night, is a New York Times critics pick and was selected for a world premiere at the 2020 Tribeca Film Festival. Additionally, she co-produces and helms the popular Brooklyn Monthly, a party called Rosie Perez that I have not worked up enough courage to go to pre-pandemic times, but will be there dancing post-pandemic times. So Driveways and Through the Night, playing with See You Next Time, will screen for the festival duration, and Leave No Trace is available March 5 through 7. So those are our panelists, and I want to start with where we are. We have a year of COVID now. Last year this time I was supposed to be going to Portland to join everyone live to participate in the festival and was unable to attend. Our lives have been completely disrupted, and some of us have dealt with that in very hard ways, and I want to know how everyone is doing at this point. How are you? No one wants to answer how they are. Well, I'll say how I am. I'm grateful for you all to be here, but I'm also thinking about the messiness of reemerging. I'm also thinking about how this experience will impact how we connect and and the work that we've created post-pandemic, but also in a lot of ways excited about that and what's possible. I think in some ways it could be a clean slate. So that's how I'm feeling in this moment. Loria, I think I'll start with you. And I created these questions in such a way that they can go across the board. So I, don't want to focus on any one filmmaker or film over, but I'm going to start with Loria. For your film, Through the Night, which is depicting a daycare in New Rochelle, New York, which is actually right around the corner from where I used to live. And it's a beautiful documentary that I hope a lot of people get a chance to see. I wanted to know, what did you want to tell with this specific story? What attracted you to this story in that moment?
Hi, and thank you so much for having me. And I'm also happy to share briefly how I'm doing. I've been thinking a lot about the fact that it's been a full year that my children have been out of school. So that's weighing really heavily on me. And I'm looking back at how I've spent my time over this past year and honestly feeling a little bit guilty because I think maybe my kids got the short end of the stick in some ways because I continued to work my full-time job and was releasing Through the Night, which even though it was all virtual, it was still, you know, a very hectic schedule, and it's not quite over. And so I'm sitting with a little bit of guilt, you know, right now, and trying to think about it's not over. You know, we still have who knows how long before us, and for them, before they sort of get the main structure of their lives back, which was, you know, school in person all the time and socializing with other kids. So I'm thinking really hard about how I reconfigure my time. This is how I'm doing. And, you know, just really feeling like what I've been doing is not sustainable. So there's that. And then in terms of what I wanted to depict with Through the Night, I think, you know, I wanted to capture two things. You know, one was kind of an external story, and one was an internal or interior story. The external story is, you know, in plain terms, just what I think of as the sheer brutality of capitalism in the United States, and the havoc that it wreaks in the lives of working class and low income folks of color, and especially women of color. And I wanted to, you know, kind of expose it for its brutality and its cruelty. I think a lot of times in the US, we talk about race and racism, and we don't speak enough about capitalism and what that actually means, and you know, how it's structured. And so it kind of retains its power because it's able to hide in plain sight. And so I wanted to expose it for what it is. And at the same time, I wanted to make visible the deeply tender and subversive and radical bonds that we form to take care of each other and to survive the brutality of capitalism. And so it was this twofold, you know, thing that I was trying to capture and make visible with the film.
Interesting, because I'm already going off my script, but it's interesting because I spent part of you know, this experience of the pandemic in these different kind of nurturing groups. And you know, there's this idea, I remember we had this call, and it was myself and other filmmakers, and they were saying, pick 3 options: burn it all down, you know, build something new, burn it all down, build something new, reform, or trying to create a system to kind of sustain and support each other as we move through it. And I remember very early on in the process, folks were like, throw away that last option. It's reform or burn it all down. So it's interesting as you're talking about the film. I think that's what deeply resonated with me, because by the time, like 3 months into talking, or maybe 5 months into talking, folks are like, actually that first option, how we take care of each other and how we sustain, you know, is how we'll be able to sustain. So it was interesting in that we often forget that we need to have that, even if you're going to do burn it down or reform. Like, you can't do either without that. So
can I say quickly to that?
Yeah.
I think there's a way in which we, before the pandemic, I think this has shifted in the pandemic moment, but before the pandemic, care was seen, you know, and this is sometimes connected, in my mind at least, to the way that motherhood in the United States is very kind of reduced and sanitized, and it's diminished. You know, it's kind of seen as a small, insignificant thing that, you know, these women, and usually like women of color, do over here on the side, unpaid, and we take it for granted, and we feel very entitled to care, right? Whether it's childcare or elder care or sick care, all the caregiving, you know, roles that people play. And, you know, I actually think that I think of it really as like the blueprint of, you know, it's, to me, it's like this is what we are working for and towards.
Yeah.
You know, like it's the way that we live in the present, what we want for the future, you know, particularly because placed within the context of our communities, you know, if you're talking about Black folks or Indigenous folks, undocumented folks, queer and trans folks, to just insist on life is radically visionary, you know, because we face this constant campaign of genocide, you know. So I think it's how we live the future.
Yeah, I do too. Thank you for that. You know, I guess my next question is, oh, sorry. Oh, no, I thought I saw. My next question is, you know, in terms of just continuing with the idea of care, I want to know, from your all's perspective, how care manifests itself in your filmmaking process. And I know that I haven't like fully defined care, but I'm also kind of playing with how you all define it as well, because I think we all exhibit that in different, bring that through in different ways. So Andrew, I think I actually want to start with you because, I mean, while Laura's film had a lot of young kids in it, you had to work with a young actor, Lucas J, who gives a phenomenal performance in Driveways. And so I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Andrew. I'm an Asian American cisgender male. I'm in a bedroom with a plant behind me. I'm wearing a hat. It's so interesting to think about care, both kind of in the film that we made, you know, with the narrative, the creative aspects of Driveways, and then also the process in which we made it. And you know, we had a young actor, Lucas J, and then also Brian Dennehy, who was 79 at the time. And I remember I told myself, and I had a conversation with my assistant director. It's like, we need to support them. You know, we need to make sure that both of our actors have a great time, that they enjoy this, and that they are that they feel safe and comfortable. And you know, that was a top priority. And I remember at the end of the shoot, you know, Brian and Lucas were laughing and having fun and talking about how much they would miss each other. And my assistant director, Sienna Brown, she looked at me and she was like, even if this movie sucks, I think we succeeded. And that for me was 100% true. You know, I think that the experience of making something, regardless of the final product, you know, if that is a joyful experience for the most vulnerable within the crew, like that is, you know, that is something to be celebrated. And then with the narrative of the film, you know, something that I've thought a lot about, you know, while making Driveways and just thinking about my own writing. Driveways was written by two playwrights, Hannah Boss and Paul Thureen. What I think I really responded to in their screenplay, and something that I'm trying to really think about in my work, is that the kind of traumatic event isn't on screen. You know, it's not in the timeline of the film. And what the focus is not on the trauma, it's on the processing. And I think that there's something about narrative filmmaking where, you know, you get feedback where it's like, you want to see the most dramatic thing, like you should show the trauma. And I think that there is a time and a place for that, but it can also be done really irresponsibly, and it can be something that triggers people in a way that it feels exploitative. And what I really loved about the emphasis in Driveways was that it was about how we move through it, how we learn from it, how we process it with community. And I think that although that may feel less quote unquote dramatic, that it's actually as profound and as meaningful, and in many ways so much more important to see. And so that's something that, you know, I really identified in Driveways and really, you know, like hope to kind of cultivate, like in the way that I give notes for other people's screenplays, in the way that I write my own screenplays. You know, I think it's a responsibility to think about if you're a fiction filmmaker.
I think it's that's interesting because you say as a fiction filmmaker, because I know, and the documentary filmmakers on this panel will say that this is a conversation that's happening so much in documentary film, but I think is incredibly important and one that needs to be happening in the fiction space as well. You know, Crystal and Deborah, I invite you to you know, share too in terms of care in your filmmaking process. Crystal, I'm really keen to hear from you.
I'm just really moving off of Andrew's anti-capitalist. It was like music, because, you know, riffs about things that can happen at the filmmaking level that, that, you know, really are the almost like the holy grails of capitalist filmmaking. You know, the most like what, you know, hammering the most lucrative, right? The most. That's why we have all that representation, you know. That's why we have all of that going for the gotcha and the true crime, why our documentary field is completely subsumed by true crime, as if murder is the only thing that human beings do that is actually interesting enough to make mini-series or limited series about, you know. But in terms of care, I really also, on Andrew's first point, I was like, my producing partner, Anne Roslini, had said quite a long time ago, you know, why does being in the field, you know, with a crew and when we're all in production, why is there this kind of gnarly vibe of, you know, that everything has to be kind of unpleasant and that it's militaristic and you know, it's okay to not say thank you. You know, I don't mean excessive socialized thank you. I mean like not thanking people and not having that work environment be okay, be sane. And so the process, that's another way that disrupts capitalism. I mean, capitalism sort of tenets for filmmaking are faster, harder, more, bigger, you know, do it. No wasted moment, no process doesn't matter. It's only the result, only the result. And so I just thought that the two things that you raised just amplify or, you know, augmented and gave this other credence to the comments that were made first about the kind of, well, you used, I think the word, not cruelty of capitalism, but the brutality, right? The brutality.
Yeah.
And that can really extend into the filmmaking process, full tilt. So, you know, I think, and then to just bring it back 1 second, I aspire very much for that, you know, for the process to mean something, for people to actually have enjoyed the 6 weeks that they were in the trenches together working, or in the small house doing the nonfiction filming. And I think, you know, someone one time said, you know, maybe you can ask this about any script, any nonfiction project, and it will probably bring you to care, which is, what is it in service to? You know, what is this film, nonfiction or fiction, what is it in service to? And once, you know, we ask that of ourselves and the colleagues that are making the film with us, I think we get close to understanding that we care about something, and some set of, you know, we basically peel back and figure out what it is that we care about, to put all those resources into the long process of making a film.
It's fantastic. Crystal?
Yeah, I mean, I've been thinking about care and not, you know, in this world now, the spaces that we occupy, and like folks were saying earlier, I think the conversations around care prior to this year really felt commodified in a way that I think we're thinking about it differently. And also I want to do my description. I'm a Black woman with cornrows in my hair and a brown sweater and gold hoops with a white door behind me. And I think what's interesting is when I first started talking with my producer Katie Lang about See You Next Time, the entry point to the film was just like, we want to see our communities in space together. Like, what space is that? What is the stage for this conversation that we keep happening because of our interpersonal relationship and the care that we have for each other, but like our communities aren't necessarily having. And that's kind of how we arrived at the nail salon. And so much of this film was about building community around the work in a way, like, and not even as like an impact goal, but we're like, if the only consequence of this film is that like women in our communities are sharing space, watching and having dialogue, like that is the point. And like, think that in a lot of ways, thinking back to especially like the time we're in now, like the intention of the film for me, I think, was like the visual representation. But when I think about it now, the intention was very much like to through the way in ways in which I can communicate, like perform an act of care for the things that I wish my community would be doing. And I think especially, you know, now, remember we had a community screening of the film, and there were like such difficult, but like such beautiful conversations like happening between Black folks and Asian folks and, you know, and really taking care of each other in that space and honoring the things that they were saying. And I just remember feeling like, if this is the feeling behind any intention of my work, like will sustain me for such a long time. And I think in this moment, a lot of those conversations are coming back, and in a way, in a context that I think, you know, in too many instances when like communities are brought together to have conversations, it's the catalyst is trauma and tension. I think kind of goes back to what Andrew's saying about his film, is so many notes that I got early on about See You Next Time was that like, but like, where's the conflict? Like the whole, like there's no story about these two communities unless it's a point of tension. And I just remember it feeling so discouraged, like no one's gonna watch this film because it's just about, you know, women getting their nails done, but also recognizing that, you know, it's self-care or a form of care for one person, but it's labor for someone else. And that's also, you know, there's care and recognizing and affirming that, you know, there's economic dynamics of the situation as well. And so, yeah, I mean, I think in just so many ways with this film, but I think also with this year, like the care to know as a filmmaker when to like pause and reflect and understand, especially as a you know, working in nonfiction now, like working and doing the thing that I love, like could cause someone harm. And what does care look like now in terms of my own filmmaking ethics and understanding of this space? So I think it's something that's like really evolving but was definitely kind of at the center of that, of See You Next Time for sure.
Yeah. You know, this takes me into, you know, the transparency and accountability in terms of, you know, as a storyteller. And the protagonists of these films represent people who are often unseen or unconsidered, and when they are, they tend to be romanticized. And so how do you as storytellers hold yourself accountable to telling these stories in a manner that isn't extractive, othering, judgmental, or deifying? In the same way there's the, you know, this stereotypes of Black women, one that I often get tired of is this idea that I have a whole bunch of magic. I don't. I'm just still a woman who wakes up every morning and tries my best at life. I have no magic. So I'm curious, in terms of you as storytellers, how do you hold yourself accountable in order to really portray the people as they are? Everyone is thinking. Andrew, I'm going to pick on you.
Did you say me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, sure. I think, you know, as a fiction filmmaker, I I often think that the exploitation can come in kind of in puppeting. You know, I think that there are certain filmmakers that want to dictate um, and like use an actor to just physically do what they need to in front of a camera so that they can get this image that is what they imagined in their minds. And I remember I went to a short film screening and I saw this film that I was very off put by, and I wasn't sure exactly why. And then during the Q&A, the filmmaker said that this was the first film that they made where everything on screen was exactly what they imagined in their head. And I just was like, that's so sad and boring, actually, you know? And so for me, I think there's a desire to not puppet, but to have an active collaboration with the actor who is the representation of this character on the page, and breathes life into that character. And so you know, for me, it's about giving as much agency to the actor uh, to have that freedom. And I think in many ways, uh, like not worrying about the kind of like psychology of the character, which I think is like kind of imposing a mindset, but really just like documenting a behavior. And I think that looseness allows the filmmaking to show respect for the actor and then therefore the character. I think it's very, very difficult. And I think that, you know, there is still a kind of dynamic at play where like an actor may like want something from a director and you know, that there's still a kind of power dynamic that might feel unequal. And so for me as a director, it's a lot about kind of, you know, not feeling like that there's a culture on set that I'm not like the like the dictator of the cast and crew, but that I am a facilitator. And so I think that, you know, that kind of mindset allows for a filmmaking to feel like it's coming into it with that an audience will see that film and feel that generosity, as opposed to a control.
Loria, I'm going to pick on you now with the same question in terms of, I mean, I think that you had to gain a lot of trust from Nunu and the folks at the daycare, but also the families and the kids that are in the film. So I guess I'd love to hear how you work to do that, and then also the balance between that and your own right to tell as a filmmaker to make the, you know, artistic decisions, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's just, I love this question because Nuno and Patrick had been featured in an article a few years before I met them. And the article was how I even found out about, you know, their particular daycare. And so I say this to say that they had already had an experience of working with journalists, right? And having people come to their home and document and share things out. And the article was really good. It was really focused on the fact that in the US, people are increasingly working multiple jobs to make ends meet, and that a lot of those jobs require overnight hours or non-standard hours. And then it was sort of posing the question of like, who looks after people's children given this reality? And they featured the daycare and a few of the families who rely on Nuno and Patrick for care. And I remember when I first spoke to Nunu, like in person, our first meeting, we actually ended up speaking for a few hours. And I multiple times said to her, you know, I understand that what I'm asking you is very delicate and very sensitive. These are people's children, some of them very, very young children. So this is not, you know, this is no small matter. I understand that. So, you know, I absolutely am open to any and all parameters that you need to set in order to make sure that everyone feels safe and comfortable in the process. And it was interesting because I said it a few times over the course of the hours that we were together. And the last time that I said it to her, she looked at me and she said, you know, I'm looking at you, I'm looking in your eyes. I know who you are. I can tell. So I'm not worried. You know, like, tell me what you need and we'll make it happen. And when she said that to me, it made me disclose to her that I had reached out to one of the people that worked on the article, and I reached out when I read it and said, you know, I'm a filmmaker. I would love to tell this story. Would you make an introduction? And they told me no, because they felt that in the process of working on the article, the families and folks in the community had been weary and apprehensive and kind of cautious, and that they didn't think that they would be open to working with a documentary film crew. And I actually took that no for an answer. I sat on the idea for 2 years. And then it wouldn't leave me alone. And so that's when I finally just kind of cold called and asked for a meeting. And a few days later, Nunu agreed to meet. And in that first meeting, Nunu says to me, I know who you are. Like, you know, and in my head, I'm looking at this woman who no one really knows what her age is, because, you know, Black don't crack, and she's the oracle, like in the Matrix kind of oracle. So, you know, my humble opinion. But, you know, this is a woman who, you know, is up there somewhere in age, and has been caring for multiple generations of people's, you know, families. And when someone like that says to you, like, I'm looking in your eyes and I can tell like where you're coming from, so I'm not worried, you know, it's like at that point, like, yes, I have a responsibility to, you know, be careful, but there's also a responsibility to not you know, I think sometimes in wanting to be careful and ethical and caring, we can go to the other extreme where we like don't respect the agency that, you know, our collaborators have and their life experience. Like, this woman has a lot of life experience, you know, and so it was a very, you know, like it was this very, you know, just memorable and eye-opening moment for me. And you know, when I told her what the experience had been with the journalist, at first she said, well, that's funny because I feel like we cooperated with them. And she kind of like took, you know, a moment, and then she was like, well, you know, actually, you know, sometimes like I felt like they were judging us a little bit, you know, and sometimes I noticed the things that they were interested in and the things that they weren't interested in capturing. And so, yeah, maybe I was a little cautious, you know? And for me, that was even like so much more exciting because, you know, there was a level of media literacy is not the right word, but there was an experience that was had with sharing their story that was not the most pleasant, that they had some reflection on and some critique that then we could build on to create something different, something that would be more pleasurable, safer, more collaborative. And so we had that kind of as a foundation to build the relationship on.
Thank you. I mean, I'm also thinking a little bit about, you know, I think Deborah had mentioned it earlier in terms of, you know, pinpointing early on for yourself as the filmmaker, but also for everyone who's working on the project, you know, what does this serve? I'm also thinking a bit about audience as well, to Andrew's point, in terms of not always having to show the trauma. You know, that's a decision that you're making on behalf of the audience, right? Like you're caring for them in that way in terms of doing that. So I'm curious to know, you know, in the process, like when you're thinking about audience, are you conscious of thinking about audience? Like how does that factor into the storytelling or the creation of the film? And maybe it doesn't. I know there's some filmmakers who are like, you know, I'm doing this for myself. But Deborah, I'll start with you in terms of this.
You know, that dance between externalizing, you know, like while you're trying to write something and, you know, asking will people be able to follow is, you know, I like to reserve that for later down the road. You know, of course, I do want all my films to be accessible. I don't want to create enigmas that, you know, just because I can or something, you know. That being said, when I'm struggling to understand something that is very difficult for me to understand about another person, like a character, you know, I of course I get cold feet. I'm like, oh, but he or she, you know, they have these qualities that are not likable, that are not attractive, maybe, you know, normatively speaking. And so that causes me to go deeper. Like, well, why does he do that? Why does she do that? You know, what is it that makes that a sustainable or you know, a response? You know, what defensiveness, whatever the trait is that we don't typically find, you know, so appealing. And so, you know, I end up. It's funny, you know, I end up being on the side of the characters very much so, because it's very hard to complete a film where you don't, even if you don't like what they do, but if you don't have any, you know, gain any understanding why they do it. So, and a lot of the work I get interested in doing is about survival. What does it take for this person, whoever it is, to navigate their life and survive? And many times, you know, it kind of dovetails with your previous question. It requires going to the source, some source, even in the fiction, right? Someone that lives in that region, someone who's had that job, someone who's walked in those shoes, that says they might do this, this, and this. I don't think they would do that. That line is really, I don't see that at all. That doesn't seem realistic. And yeah, so I think it's a combination for me of needing to know why we do what we do, whoever we are, you know, both the acts that we deem good and the acts that we deem super difficult and upsetting. And secondly, try to verify that with the source. You know, I'm very much, again, aligning myself with like a comment from Andrew, which is, you know, we're born into one life. You know, and I didn't introduce myself, but you know, I'm born into the body of a white woman sitting against a colorful wall, dark hair, one social class, one body, several regions, and so in order to have to not deify or make a lot of assumptions and create it out of my imagination, because I'm a social realist, I have to ask for informants if it's a story that is outside the experiences I've had. And that is something that I'm very much really resonating with the fellow filmmakers here tonight. You know, I'm kind of excited for this movement that we, you know, this particular panel represents, you know, American filmmakers pushing into some movements that are outside of the sort of mainstream of capitalist filmmaking.
I want to jump in on that and say I definitely was thinking about audience a lot, and I had like specific faces and names of people in mind, beginning with the protagonists of the film themselves. Like I feel like I was very much thinking of making this for them. from my mother, from my best friend who's a nurse, from my other best friend who's a single mom. So I had, it was, these specific folks that are part of this community who are living this reality. I was making the film for them. And I think my challenge was, how do I make a film that is about the harm and the violence that we have to navigate in this society without the film and the experience of watching the film feeling violent and harmful. And that was the challenge for me. And I think, where I landed was centering first the experience of folks from this community and what it would feel like for them, for us to watch it. And where I landed was that I wanted the film to feel like the rest, the breath, the tenderness, the ease that we are denied. And I centered that, and then sort of placed kind of the external piece on like a second plane. It took a back seat. I think it still comes across, but my primary kind of concern in terms of the aesthetics and the tone of the film were, in some ways wanting to make an offering, a cinematic offering to this community of the very things that we are denied.
I love that idea of an offering. I mean, I think about it in terms of, as a recovering cinema operator, I'd often see where, documentary filmmakers, and a lot of times, most of the time, white documentary filmmakers would say, well, I made this film about this community. So you go find the people in that community and show this film to them. And I'd be like, the people in that community don't want to sit for 2 hours and watch this film. It's a bunch of trauma and pain. They've already experienced that. They're not trying to come for this. So it's exciting for me to hear this idea of offering, and also see how you, Loria, and others on this panel, but really with Through the Night, how you were able to do that so beautifully in terms of balancing, being true to what folks are experiencing, but also showing so much of the abundance and love and care that is also in that space that's sustaining them. I think that balance is super important. And I think it's one that is hard for a lot of filmmakers to see, especially if they're not from the community, because they're either going in with one expectation, or, to what Debra was saying, they're not doing that deep research and having real conversations and connections. So, I am excited about the future. And one of the things I am also thinking a lot about is, all of these films are films that have just been in my head since I've seen them, right? And so when Amy said, let's do a conversation, really and truly, it was just like, I want to put these films together because I want the audience that comes to this festival to have this in this moment, to be able to experience these films and they not shirk away from the realities and the harsh realities of life and the brutality of capitalism, as we've talked about, the neglect from our government in terms of how they take care of people. But I also wanted them to see that we still as people in community take care of each other, and we're able to move forward. So really, I feel all of your films are offerings, and that is why they're in this program together. And to that point, I just wanted to, ask a final question, because I know Loria has to go, but and also I've taken a lot of all of your precious Saturday time, and I know you all have family and others and yourselves to care for. But I am thinking a lot about, like I said, as a recovering cinema operator, it's the blockbusters, it's those big escapist things that people tend to go to. And then beautiful films like the ones that you all have made tend to be ones that people still come to, but it's harder for the studios and other folks and people to get behind and say that these are worth being out there. And I'm curious because I kind of feel like, after this year of COVID and fascism and racial uprisings, you know, sensational doesn't feel so sensational anymore. And I'm just grappling with, you know, even, I don't know if any of you are watching WandaVision, but here is a whole Marvel TV show about grief, you know, which people were more into that aspect of it than the actual superhero aspect of it. So I'm curious to know, and maybe this is, again, me being more abundant, hopeful than realistic, but I'm curious to know if you think that this is going to have an impact on what, well, let's put it this way. I don't want to ask you that. I want to ask you, you know, what you want to see coming out of it, if that's changed at all. And then I guess also if you're hopeful that there will be people who are going to be thinking about what they see differently and not necessarily looking for that escape, but trusting a filmmaker to take care of them through that process of that film. So long question, but yeah, I'm curious in terms of what you're thinking about the future of what people see or want to see. Crystal.
I can start. No, it's really interesting, Laura, to hear about your process making the film. I'm also a child of someone who worked nights and spent a lot of time with a caretaker at night. And I remember feeling like everything that you're saying, but also really held through the experience of watching the film. And also for the first time, like really confronting the fact that my mom probably had a lot of guilt. And I like, as a child, I like had never really thought of, but it wasn't like a painful process. It was one of those things where I felt like I was being carried through that experience. And that's what I am interested in seeing. Like, I think that when we talk about care, I think that I just am hopeful that, you know, one of the consequences of this time is that there's more space made for filmmakers that, and more resources for filmmakers that implement aspects of care into the experience of watching the film, the life of the film, the collaboration, and, you know, if anything during this time, I've like really shied away from loud films, like things that make like I'm like strong aversion to any blockbuster type films now, just because I think that there's just so much silence around our lives now. It's been like really, I think, engaging with work that like you can feel the intention when you're like immersed in the image is something that I feel like I've spent a lot of time like really honoring that as like a part of like a really unique type of filmmaking, you know? Like I think that I'm always like, yeah, my films are kind of quiet and I like, you know, don't really like, you know, just things are implied, but that's one thing that I hope matures a lot in terms of my process is and I oftentimes don't even really think about audience. It's more so, you know, where does my like intention and vision meet with the reality of a specific space? And I think that I just hope there's more like space for care in general. I know that sounds really basic, but I think I've been really gravitating towards work now that that like challenges me and makes me think, but also you can like sense the care and the craft of making the film as well.
Anyone else want to share? Okay. Well,
I mean, if nothing else, I hope that we care for the caregivers in our lives and our communities, that, you know, what we now understand about the essential and critical nature of care does not dissipate, you know, and that there begins to be reciprocity on an individual level, community level, political level, for these people that, you know, keep us alive. That's one. And I think, you know, there are currently, I feel like I'm in such amazing company of cinema being made by Black women and femmes that is really centering like the everyday of our lives, and you know, the kind of interior stuff that up until now we've gotten through literature. You know, there's amazing literature, right, from like Toni Morrison and so many other, you know, authors that have really dwelled in that space, but we haven't had that. You know, we've had bursts of it, moments in cinema, but not sustained. And it feels like right now there's so many amazing Black women and femmes creating work that's about that. You know, it's like us making stuff about us for us. And I hope that that continues because we need a lot more of it.
Yeah, I hope so too. And I hope so the Guild allows people to pay for more of it and also redistribute whatever, just to get that funding there, because it's amazing work and it's work that's long overdue. I want to thank you all for just going on this roller coaster ride with me. I really appreciate it. I mean, I wish I could have a dinner party and we could just have this type of conversation. And maybe we'll do that post-COVID. But thank you so much, really, for participating. And I hope everyone has a wonderful Saturday. And I want to thank our audience for joining.